Ernie had always found solace in the solitude of his remote cabin, nestled deep within the woods. It was a place where he could escape the hustle and bustle of city life, immersing himself in the tranquility of nature. However, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced ominously through the trees, a sense of unease began to creep into his sanctuary. The cabin, though rustic and charming by day, took on an eerie quality at night. The creaking of the wooden floorboards, the whisper of the wind through the cracks in the walls, and the distant hoot of an owl all conspired to unsettle Ernie's nerves. He brushed it off as his imagination playing tricks on him, but the feeling of being watched persisted. It was late, and Ernie decided to retire to bed. He locked the front door and checked all the windows, ensuring they were secure. The familiar routine should have brought comfort, but tonight it felt different. The air was heavy with an unspoken tension. Lying in bed, Ernie couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His eyes darted around the room, lingering on the dark corners where the light from his bedside lamp couldn't reach. He tried to read a book to distract himself, but the words blurred together, and he found himself straining to listen for any unusual sounds. A sudden thud from the living room jolted him upright. Heart pounding, Ernie grabbed a flashlight and cautiously made his way toward the noise. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing out of the ordinary. The furniture was as he had left it, and the front door was still securely locked. Just as he was about to dismiss it as the house settling, he heard it again, a deliberate, unmistakable sound of footsteps outside the cabin. Ernie's pulse quickened. He moved to the window, peering out into the inky blackness. The dense forest made it difficult to see anything beyond a few feet, but he could sense movement among the trees. Ernie's mind raced. Who could be out here in the middle of nowhere at this hour? He considered calling the police, but the nearest station was miles away, and he had no cell service in this isolated spot. He was on his own. Gathering his courage, Ernie decided to confront whoever was out there. He grabbed a sturdy flashlight and a kitchen knife, hoping the sight of it would deter any potential intruders. As he stepped outside, the cool night air sent a shiver down his spine. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice wavering slightly. Silence greeted him. He scanned the tree line, his flashlight casting long, dancing shadows. There was no response, no sign of anyone. Ernie's eyes caught a glimpse of something shiny on the ground near the edge of the forest. He approached cautiously, his grip tightening on the knife. It was a small metallic object, partially buried in the dirt. He bent down to pick it up, revealing a set of keys he didn't recognize. As he examined the keys, a chill ran down his spine. Someone had been here, and they had dropped these. But why? What were they trying to do? Ernie's mind whirled with questions, but before he could process them, he heard another sound, a soft, almost imperceptible rustling from the underbrush. He turned the flashlight toward the noise, the beam illuminating a pair of eyes reflecting the light back at him. They were wide, unblinking, and filled with a strange, unsettling intensity. Ernie's breath caught in his throat as he realized he was not alone. "Who are you?" Ernie demanded, his voice shaking. The eyes continued to stare at him, unyielding and unnerving. The rustling grew louder, and Ernie felt his heart pounding in his chest. He took a step back, his grip on the knife tightening. The figure slowly emerged from the underbrush, revealing a man in his late 40s, disheveled and dirty. His clothes were torn, and his face was gaunt, with hollow cheeks and wild eyes. He held his hands up in a gesture of surrender, but there was something off about him, something that sent a chill down Ernie's spine. "Please," the man said, his voice raspy and desperate. "I need your help." Ernie hesitated, unsure whether to trust the stranger. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The man looked around nervously, as if expecting someone to jump out from the shadows. They're after me. I don't know who they are, but they've been following me for days. I thought I could lose them in the woods, but I ended up here." Ernie's mind raced. Was this man telling the truth, or was he part of some elaborate ruse? He couldn't afford to take any chances. "Who were you talking about? Who's following you?" The man shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. "I don't know. They don't show themselves, but I can feel them watching me. I hear them at night, whispering in the dark." Ernie glanced around, the oppressive silence of the forest closing in on him. He had to make a decision, and fast. "Come inside," he said finally. "We'll figure this out." The man nodded gratefully, and together they headed back to the cabin. Ernie locked the door behind them, his mind racing with questions. Who was this man? What was he running from? And most importantly, were they safe now that they were inside? As they sat in the dimly lit living room, The man introduced himself as Jack. He explained how he had been hiking in the woods when he first noticed someone following him. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing day. He had tried to shake them off, but they were relentless. Ernie listened intently, trying to piece together the puzzle. "Do you have any idea why they're after you?" he asked. Jack shook his head. "No, I don't. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just a regular guy, but they seem to know everything about me." The conversation was interrupted by a loud banging on the front door, causing both men to jump. Ernie's heart raced as he grabbed the knife, motioning for Jack to stay quiet. The banging continued, more insistent this time. Ernie approached the door cautiously, his hand trembling as he reached for the doorknob. He hesitated, then swung the door open, ready to confront whoever was on the other side. But the porch was empty. There was no sign of anyone, no footsteps retreating into the night, just the quiet rustling of the trees and the distant call of an owl. Ernie closed the door, his mind reeling. Something was very wrong, and whatever it wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. Frank settled into his armchair, the silence of the house pressing in around him. His wife and children were away for the weekend, leaving him alone for the first time in years. He had been looking forward to this, the solitude, the peace. The suburban neighborhood was quiet, the only sound the occasional rustle of leaves outside. As the evening drew in, Frank turned on the television, half watching a documentary while sipping his coffee. The hours slipped by until it was nearly midnight. He yawned, stretching his legs, and decided it was time for bed. Frank went through his nightly routine, brushing his teeth and double-checking that all the doors and windows were locked. He felt a small twinge of anxiety as he checked the back door, an unfamiliar unease that made him pause. He shook his head, laughing at himself for being paranoid, and headed upstairs to his bedroom. Lying in bed, Frank found it hard to fall asleep. The house, usually filled with the sounds of his family's chatter and footsteps, felt unnervingly quiet. He listened intently, straining to catch any noise. Just as he was starting to drift off, he heard it, a faint creak from downstairs. Frank sat up, heart pounding. He told himself it was just the house settling, but the noise had sounded too deliberate. He grabbed his phone and tiptoed to the top of the stairs, peering into the darkness below. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice shaky. No response. He waited a moment longer, then slowly descended the stairs, his phone's flashlight cutting through the gloom. In the living room, everything appeared normal. He checked the front door, still locked. He moved to the kitchen and found the back door secure. He was about to turn back when he noticed something odd. The basement door was ajar. Frank's heart raced. He was certain he had closed it. He approached cautiously, nudging the door open with his foot. The darkness of the basement seemed to swallow the light from his phone. He hesitated at the top of the stairs, listening for any sound. Suddenly, a soft thud echoed from below. Frank's breath caught in his throat. He stepped back, closing the basement door firmly and locking it. He hurried back upstairs, his mind racing with possibilities. Was someone in the house? Had he forgotten to lock the basement door? He dialed 911, feeling a mix of fear and embarrassment. What if it was nothing? But the operator's calm voice reassured him. "We'll send an officer to check it out, sir. Stay on the line." Frank waited, phone pressed to his ear, eyes darting around the room. After what felt like an eternity, he saw the flashing lights of a police car through the window. A knock at the door made him jump. He rushed to open it, relieved to see the uniformed officer. "Good evening, sir. We received a report of a possible intruder." Frank nodded, explaining the noises and the open basement door. The officer listened carefully, then asked, "Do you have a key to the basement?" Frank handed it over, and the officer proceeded to the basement door, unlocking it and descending the stairs. Frank waited at the top, anxiety gnawing at him. A few minutes later, the officer reappeared. "There's no one down there, sir. Everything seems in order." Frank let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Thank you, officer. I must have been imagining things." The officer gave him a reassuring smile. "It's better to be safe than sorry. If you hear anything else, don't hesitate to call." After the officer left, Frank locked up again and went back to bed. He felt a little foolish but also relieved. Maybe he really had imagined it. He lay back, trying to let the calm return. But just as he was drifting off, he heard another sound, a soft click from the hallway. Frank's eyes snapped open, dread washing over him. This time, he was sure he hadn't imagined it. He reached for his phone, ready to call for help again, when when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The basement key, which he had left on the kitchen counter, was now lying on the floor beside his bed. Frank's hand trembled as he picked up the key, his mind racing. How had it gotten there? He was sure he had left it on the kitchen counter. The realization that someone might be in the house sent a chill down his spine. He dialed 911 again, his voice barely a whisper. "This is Frank Johnson. I think there's someone in my house. I need help." The operator's calm voice was a lifeline. "Stay on the line, sir. Officers are on their way." Frank clutched the phone, listening intently. He heard soft footsteps coming up the stairs. Panic surged through him, but he forced himself to think clearly. He slipped quietly out of bed and moved to the closet, hiding behind the clothes. The footsteps grew louder, pausing outside his bedroom door. Frank's heart pounded so loudly he was sure it would give him away. The door creaked open, and he held his breath, praying the intruder wouldn't find him. A shadow passed by the closet door, and Frank could see the outline of a figure through the slats. The intruder paused, then continued to search the room. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps retreated, and Frank heard the sound of the front door opening and closing. He waited a few moments before daring to move. Slowly, he emerged from the closet and crept to the window. He saw the figure slipping into the darkness, disappearing into the night. Relief washed over him as he heard the distant wail of sirens. The police arrived moments later. Frank hurried to the door, explaining what had happened. The officers searched the house thoroughly, but there was no sign of the intruder. They reassured Frank that they would patrol the area and advised him to stay with a friend or family member for the night. Frank called his brother, who lived nearby. Within half an hour, his brother arrived, and Frank quickly packed a bag. As they drove away, Frank couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Who had been in his house? What were they looking for? The next morning, Frank returned home with his brother. The house felt different now, the sense of security shattered. As they walked through the rooms, Frank noticed something he hadn't seen before, a small folded piece of paper on the kitchen table. With trembling hands, he unfolded it. The message was simple, written in neat, precise handwriting. "You were lucky this time. I'll be back." Frank's blood ran cold. He showed the note to his brother, who immediately called the police. The officers took the note as evidence and promised to increase their patrols in the neighborhood. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly returned to normal. Frank installed a new security system and made sure every door and window was reinforced. Yet the feeling of being watched never entirely left him. He resumed his daily routine, but every creak of the house, every shadow outside, made his heart race. He knew the intruder's promise still hung over him, a dark cloud that wouldn't dissipate. One evening, as he sat in his armchair, trying to relax, his phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Remember, Frank, I'm always watching." Frank's hand tightened around the phone. He knew this wasn't over. The intruder had been in his house, had seen him at his most vulnerable, and now he was waiting for the right moment to strike again. Frank looked around his quiet house, feeling the walls close in. He had thought he was safe, but safety was an illusion. The real horror was knowing that the intruder could come back at any time, and Frank had no idea who they were or what they wanted. As he sat there, the weight of the silence pressing down on him, Frank realized that his life had changed forever. The sense of security he had once taken for granted was gone, replaced by a lingering fear that he could never truly escape.